It's been no secret that Josh Heupel has done a tremendous job in rebuilding Tennessee football. After a couple of bad hires in Derek Dooley, Butch Jones, and Jeremy Pruitt, the Volunteers desperately needed a coach that could turn them around, make them exciting, and help them compete at the top of the SEC. Josh Heupel has not yet won a national title, but he has gotten Tennessee football back on the map, had them in the college football playoff last year, and the horizon is super bright for the Volunteers. In today's video, we're going to do a feature on how Josh Heupel rebuilt Tennessee, talk about the rise of the Volunteers, and what the future continues to look like in Rocky Top. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Josh Heupel and his rebuild of Tennessee. Okay, so let's first go back in time. Coming off the Philip Fulmer era at Tennessee, they're looking to keep up their momentum and stay as one of the top teams in the conference. But almost from the get-go, it was immediately harder for them to keep the same level of success, as they hired Lane Kiffin in 2009 and improved to 7-6, but he didn't stick around for 2010. They then went with Derek Dooley as the coach after that, and he was a disaster, so in 2013 they turned to Butch Jones. Butch Jones came in from Cincinnati, where he had coached from 2010 to 2012 and had gone 23-14 with 2 straight Conference USA titles. He also had some success at Central Michigan, so there was a good enough body of work to think he could make the transition to SEC football. In his first year, the Vols went 5-7, which wasn't much of a surprise, but then they improved to 7-6 and 9-4. They had some tough losses in 2015, including that double overtime thriller against Oklahoma, but 2016 was full of hype. The team ended up going 9-4, and this included some very disappointing losses at the end of the year, most notably Vanderbilt and South Carolina. That was their peak under Coach Jones, and they would then fall apart in 2017, and he'd get fired. He was replaced with Jeremy Pruitt in 2018, and he was worse than Derek Dooley. Originally, Tennessee didn't want Pruitt, as they wanted to hire Greg Schiano, but that didn't work out, and the fans protested. They went to Coach Pruitt, who went 5-7, which was pretty bad, but it wasn't as bad as what came next. Over the next 2 years, it was discovered that he was literally bribing recruits to come to Tennessee with money in McDonald's bags, and what's funny about it is even though he was obviously cheating, he wasn't a good coach either, and his team went 7-5 in 2019 and 3-7 in 2020 before he was fired, and those 2 seasons were vacated. Tennessee quickly became one of the most laughed at teams in the conference, because even when they were winning games, there was still some controversy brewing behind the scenes. So they needed to find a no-nonsense coach in 2021 who was a bright enough offensive mind to keep pace in the SEC, and they found that in Josh Heupel. Okay, so Josh Heupel's background, as he was one of the best offensive coordinators in college football and was considered an innovator. He played quarterback for Oklahoma back in the 90s and early 2000s and spent a couple of years on some NFL practice squads before becoming a coach. He started as a tight ends coach in Arizona before going back to Oklahoma to coach quarterbacks. He became the offensive coordinator and stayed there until 2015, where he left for the same job at Utah State. He'd be there for 1 year before getting his first SEC job at Missouri as their OC, and he helped out Drew Lock. He stayed there until 2018 before he replaced Scott Frost as the head man at UCF. He instantly kept UCF's success going 12-1 with their only loss in the Fiesta Bowl. He then went 10-3 in 2019 before going 6-4 in 2020. But his offenses were good enough for him to return to the SEC, and he had proven success as a head coach, so Tennessee would hire him to turn their program around and get back to the level they were under Philip Fulmer all those years ago. Honestly, Heupel's first season at Tennessee wasn't all that bad, but it definitely didn't stand out at all. The Volunteers finished the season at 7-6 with a double overtime loss against Purdue to end their season in the Music City Bowl. They are very inconsistent as a team, winning games by putting up a lot of points on offense and losing teams because they couldn't put a lot of points on the board. While the defense was a work in progress, Coach Heupel's offense immediately was how their team would win. They finished the year with the 7th best offense in the country, as they had 39.3 points per game. He is helped out by a great player at quarterback in Hendon Hooker, as Hooker finished the 2021 season with nearly 3,000 yards and 31 touchdowns, as well as 600 yards and 5 scores on the ground. Tennessee also had a good receiver room, with guys like Cedric Tillman, Velus Jones Jr., and Jalen Hyatt, all eventually making it to the NFL. It was a good start to a coaching career, but with the SEC being a tough conference, Coach Heupel needed to improve fast if he wanted to improve at all. The next year, though, Tennessee relaunched themselves as one of the top teams in the SEC as soon as the season started. They obliterated Ball State and then beat number 17 Pitt. They followed that up with a dismantling of Akron 63-6 before facing number 20 Florida in their first SEC game. There were some questions about how legit Tennessee was, but they made themselves legit by beating the Gators 38-33. They then went to Baton Rouge and beat number 25 LSU before having one of the best games of the last few years, beating number 3 Alabama 52-49. I was personally at that game, and it was electric. Game day was there, the stadium was full, and Tennessee football was back. After that, they beat Tennessee Tech and number 19 Kentucky before they would take their first loss of the year against number 1 Georgia. It was no surprise they lost that game because Georgia's just that dominant. After that, the brakes sort of came off, as while they did beat Mizzou 66-24, they lost in a crazy upset against South Carolina 63-38, and then also lost Hendon Hooker for the year. They would finish the year with a 56-point shutout of Vanderbilt, and then would beat Clemson in the Orange Bowl, but if the playoff would have expanded earlier, the Vols would have been there. Heupel's offense at Tennessee got even better from year 1 into year 2, as he finished with the top-ranked offense in the country, scoring 46 points per game, while allowing under 29 points per game on defense. Statistically, that 2022 Tennessee team was one of the best teams there ever was, and they were once again led by Hendon Hooker in front of Joe Milton, and he threw for 3,200 yards with 27 touchdowns and 5 more scores on the ground. The passing offense was once again good, with Jalen Hyatt leading the SEC with 1,300 yards and 15 touchdowns, and Brew McCoy also had nearly 700 yards and 4 scores. But where Tennessee improved the most was the running game, with Jalen Wright and Jabari Small combining for 23 touchdowns. After a season like that, there was going to be a lot of hype for the Volunteers, and it was going to be pretty well earned. Hendon Hooker went off to the NFL, which left Joe Milton as the starting quarterback, but instead of improving, Tennessee actually took a step back, and despite that though, they still managed to play the best teams in the conference that year, as they finished with a 9-4 record, including losses to Florida, Alabama, Missouri, and Georgia. Their offense went back down to earth a little bit at just under 32 points per game, and part of that was probably due to their offensive coordinator, Alex Golesh, leaving to become the head man at USF. Joe Milton threw for 2,800 yards and 20 touchdowns, and it was pretty apparent that while he was physically talented, he wasn't as good of a quarterback as Hendon Hooker had been. But the running game had continued to be good, with Jalen Wright rushing for over 1,000 yards and Dylan Sampson starting to blossom as a backup. But before the Citrus Bowl at the end of the season, Tennessee turned to a new quarterback for 2024, and that'd be freshman quarterback Nico Imaliava. Nico was Coach Heupel's biggest recruiting win at Tennessee, and a highly touted quarterback from Long Beach, California. He was going to be tied in Tennessee's success in the future, and while the Vols technically didn't have as good of a season as they had 2 years before, they would end up in the college football playoff in his first year as a starter. They finished the regular season at 10-2, with losses to Arkansas and Georgia. That Arkansas loss was really confusing since the Razorbacks struggled all season, but Tennessee also had wins over Alabama, Oklahoma, and NC State, which on paper looked good to the committee, but Oklahoma and NC State really weren't any good. They ended up getting matched up with Ohio State in the first round, and this was a game that would take place in Columbus. There was a lot of hype from Tennessee fans for that game, and despite the fans traveling well, they got killed 42-17, and it felt super embarrassing, and Ohio State went on to win it all. But in terms of stats, the Vols were good across the board. They finished with the 13th best offense, scoring 36 points per game, but also had an elite defense that finished with 7th in points allowed. Heupel's teams had developed a defense over time, not just an offense. Nico threw for 2,600 yards with 19 touchdowns, and while he didn't look as good as Hendon Hooker did, there were still enough flashes to tell Vols fans that he was going to be pretty good for their future if he stayed and developed. But that would not be the case, as he ended up sitting out to try to get more NIL money, and Coach Heupel called his bluff and cut him from the team. He then transferred to UCLA for the upcoming season, and now Tennessee will rely on Joey Aguilar or Jake Merklinger to be the guy, as Joey actually transferred in from UCLA by way of App State, and Merklinger was a high-rated recruit. There's definitely going to be some growing pains, but even still though, Coach Heupel has built a team in Knoxville that seems to be pretty balanced on both sides of the ball, so he can afford to take his time and build up guys in the quarterback room into being guys that can compete. He's definitely gotten the hang of being a successful head coach, and you don't really see him getting into any beefs or fights or any sort of controversy at Tennessee. So, he's exactly the type guy they needed as their head coach, and he'll continue to be at or near the top of the SEC over these next few years, especially if he can get over Georgia, Texas, and Alabama to be at the top. So why has Coach Heupel been successful? Well, the main reason he's been successful is because he's not just been able to be an offensive innovator, but he's got a really good support staff with him. A lot of what goes into being a successful coach is knowing when to defer stuff to other guys, and Heupel has had a lot of good assistant coaches throughout the years. Obviously, Coach Golesh is one of the best OCs in the country and is now the head man at USF, but Heupel replaced him with Joey Hazel, who's become one of the brightest young minds in the country. Early on, we saw that Heupel's defenses could be a problem, but he brought in some really good assistants on the defensive side, with Tim Banks becoming one of the best DCs in the nation. Tennessee has really grown with Heupel, which makes him another coach that's really relatable to his players, especially since he was a quarterback at a high level of football back when he played. He was also a junior college quarterback, so he knows how to dig deep and keep fighting for opportunities. But he's also been a really good recruiter for Tennessee, and so far the Volunteers have the 11th best recruiting class for 2025 and the 14th best recruiting class in 2024. He's really been able to steer Tennessee away from those embarrassing off-the-field incidents that kept them in a bad public relations standing. That's a huge factor to winning, and combining that with the right transfers and recruits, capitalizing on big game opportunities, and just keeping his nose clean has helped Tennessee football go from a laughingstock in the SEC to now a Tier 2 team that will probably annually compete for college football playoff spots. But what do you guys think? If you're a Tennessee fan, what do you think of Josh Heupel? How did he rebuild the Volunteers? What did I get right and wrong? And which school or coach should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.